Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman podcast.
So few people are good at it. Instead, we start thinking of them as calls or meetings or I'm going to pitch.
Hello Sales Nation, I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman podcast, and welcome to today's episode. On today's show we have Nancy Bleeke, and on today's show we're diving into the world of questions, which leads into just communication as a whole, and this is appropriate both in sales and whether you're dealing with your girlfriend, boyfriend, dad, mum, brothers, sisters, everyone that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. Questioning and improving your ability to ask good questions is going to help you improve your relationships with them. You can find out more about Nancy over at salesproinsider.com. Everything else is linked to in the show notes over at salesman.red. And with that all said, let's jump into today's episode. Hey Nancy, and welcome to the Salesman podcast.
So glad to be here, Will.
I'm excited to have you on. We're going to dive into one of my favorite conversations. We talk about it all the time on the show, and that is essentially how to have a good conversation and the benefits of it. And what I'm going to start the questioning with is essentially a hugely loaded question, because I know exactly what you're going to say, and I know that we're both going to agree on it, and we're both going to be stroking each other's egos of how important all of this is, because I think we're on the same wavelength with it. And that is a fantastic conversation, and the ability and perhaps even the skill set to produce one when you're sat down with a prospect. Is that the most underrated asset that salespeople have right now in 2016?
Yes, it is. I like it as an asset because we all have the ability to access that asset and hone it and make it better. And it's not about technology. It's about having a good conversation.
And is this, I use the word skill set specifically then, because is this something that we can train, improve on, or are some people just born with the quote unquote gift of the gab?
Oh, the gift of the gab. I think the gift of the gab can kill you in sales. So yes, they are skills that we can learn and hone and develop and excel at.
Good stuff. Well, there's a couple of things I want to chat about before we get into the hows and the whys of this. Because I think it's important to understand the importance of it all before we just kind of throw out all the practical tips and techniques, because clearly we need to get people motivated to put them into practice. And so another angle of all of this as well is that I feel, tell me if you agree with this, that conversations are the best way to perhaps differentiate yourself from the competition as well.
I agree wholeheartedly, yes.
And why is that? And I can give a couple of anecdotes from my perspective and my background in medical device sales, but why is it such a differentiator?
Because so few people are good at it. So few people know how to engage the person that's involved in that interaction. And instead we start thinking of them as calls or meetings or I'm going to pitch. And they forget that it's a human being that they're talking with, not talking at. And so few people do it. I mean, I'm the recipient every day of at least one call-in or contact that is not starting a conversation or connecting with me.
Well, I know from my perspective, my background is medical device sales. Regulations all know this. I had a lot of problems, and I was just speaking with someone over LinkedIn, one of the listeners of the show today, about this. I had a lot of problems with our products were the best products on the market, best branding, best training behind them, really prestigious company. But because of this, they were more expensive. So in the NHS, you've got this battle between the procurement teams have a list of cheapest products that they want the surgeons to buy from. And then you've got me and the surgeons on the other side. And all my deals, bar none, every single one of them came from relationships that I built with surgeons through conversations, through how you just described, which is really interesting to me how you described it, of not treating them as a prospect, but treating them as an individual that you're going to build a relationship with and then hopefully sell to over the longer term. Is this something that is becoming more and more important, or is it becoming less important with things like technology, social selling, all these other kind of angles to go out with sales? Is it more or less important right now to be able to build a long-term relationship with someone versus be able to kind of like narrow down, target them, get them at the right moment, and then just throw a pitch at them?
Well, I think the long-term relationship, some people get scared of that. We need sales faster than that. We're not going to, dilly-dally down all these conversations. But that's the long run. But we have to be ready to make every single conversation valuable to them and to us. And that is important today as it has ever been. I think it's almost more important though, because over the last 8 to 10 years, I think sales leaders, company owners, executives have decided that technology can take away so much of the headache of dealing with their salespeople, and the sales team, that they're investing all this money in the latest technology, the latest tool. And if we just do this, we're going to get that. But even those tools are only as good as the people who are using them. So that's a whole nother conversation, is the internal conversation, to help people be successful. But with all of that, I think there's more automation happening for lead generation and trying to move people through the sales decision making. And it's, I think, stalling people's decision making. I think that there's so much information that to get to a decision, people more than ever are inundated with information, data, details, and it's slowed down decision. So the salesperson that can help them cut out the information they don't need and focus on what's important to them is going to help them make a quicker decision, meaning they're going to get the value of whatever that is you're selling faster. And that's a key differentiator for now and for the long run.
So let me get this right, because I just want to reiterate this and make sure that we don't lose any of the points you just made, because I see huge value in if you're doing a sell that's easy, automating it, giving out the information, and letting the buyer make a decision at their own kind of like time frame is valuable if you can get these people at a huge kind of audience. Clearly, it's worked for loads of companies, and it's going to continue to have successful people. But I think there's huge value if you are a sales professional listening to this, that you have the opportunity to cut out a lot of the essentially nonsense, crap, the bickering internally that your decision makers are making, that are going through. All these kind of things are in your control to be able to just have a conversation and work through. And so that in itself, just the time value, the time saving value of all this, that's clearly has a kind of on paper benefit to the prospects as well, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And this is something that I never hear anyone really talk about. There's yourself and your book, which is excellent, but there's very few people talking about. Everyone wants to talk about the tools and the hacks and the techniques versus what the individual can do to help in this scenario itself. Why is that?
Right. It's interesting. We own it. Each salesperson can own how successful they are in their conversations. And I can look at sales teams, and you can find some really good producers who actually maybe haven't even adopted the latest tool, right? They're kind of like, I'll get to that when I need to, etc. And so when we look at it, I think part of it is that they're owning their part in the sale. And we talk about the fact that, you're not looking for a win-win when you're selling, because a win-win is typically looked at that the company's going to win a sale and that customer is going to get what they need. But you're a stakeholder in that whole process too. So we need to look for win-win-win. I call it the win cubed, because when I'm successful, I win, whether that's better compensation, a good reputation, feeling good about helping people, whatever drives me. But those other stakeholders all win too. And so it's owning that, we each have a responsibility to what happens. And I think that that's different than some people look at sales.
And do you think salespeople try and push away that responsibility, because with the responsibility also comes, the chance of rejection, your ego being taken a hit if you don't close a deal, whereas I guess if you're relying on tools, you can just blame the tool, or you can blame the process as opposed to you individually.
It's accountability, isn't it? Right? Being accountable for your outcomes and what happens. So I agree. And it's we can do a lot of blaming, and there's a lot of reasons why things don't progress as we want. But I think some of it also comes down to being purposeful in having a conversation that matters to them and us. It does come down to, we can own that.
Okay, then what is an example? Because I think this is something simple to say, but difficult perhaps to put into practice, or easy to say, difficult to conceptualize, and an example or two will solve this. But
Yes.
what is a conversation that is good for them, and what is a conversation that is good for us? What does that consist of?
Well, it consists of an open exchange of information where when we're there, we are helping them maybe clarify and confirm information they already have about their problem, their opportunities that maybe they don't even know really exist for them if they do something different, approach something different, etc., and look for their wants and needs. So our ability to ask them questions to find out, what's going on, what is it that they need to accomplish, are the reasons that it's not, and also what are the risks and rewards important to them, because a lot of people won't do something because they don't see the benefit of doing something greater than the risk or the downsides of that change. And so our ability to ask questions and help them, like I said, they have a lot of information, even if whatever you're selling, they're already getting filled in some other way. If you come in and through your insight, and people keep talking about insights, that doesn't mean being able to come and give them 3 books and blab all this information at them. To me, insight is being prepared and knowing your stuff so that you can converse, meaning that I don't have to tell you everything I know. I can start extracting out of you, what do you already know? What is your opinion on this? And through that, I then earn the right to then say, you know what? Here's how I would match that up. So it's how we set up our questions. It's how we set up our information. In talking with people like you, in other, companies, I've noticed a trend over the last few months. And then we lead into a question. So I establish myself as having some expertise and some knowledge, but I turn it back to them. And through what they're going to tell us, then I can supplement it. So it's not coming in as the know-it-all, even though we probably know more than them, but making sure that it's an exchange. And that's why it's a conversation, because I'm going to find out what you know, so I don't retell you what you already know. I can help confirm that's what I'm seeing too. I can bring in additional information maybe you haven't thought about. And then that leads us to more of a conversation of, well, how is what we have maybe help you?
So are we trying to I'm trying to frame this and you probably nailed this already, but I'm trying to frame it more like in an eloquent statement. Are we trying to essentially take what they know and put it into context? Is that our job of a conversation?
I think it's taking what they know and putting it into context and helping sometimes confirm what they're already doing right, what they already know, but also then help clarify. Because a lot of people get stuck in their own paradigms and their internal information and their own experiences, and we start losing sight of the bigger picture. And so when we can help them look at things in a more broad way, and it opens up their willingness to say, well, how could you maybe help us with that? Or we can say, you know what? I work with companies like this, and this is how our product or our service can help you. You want to hear more. Now I've earned the right to give my recommendation, but I still make that collaborative in a conversation too by asking for feedback and such.
So I want to ask you about a specific thing that you said then, because I don't want to gloss over it. And I found this in medical device sales all the time. The surgeon or procurement, whoever it is, knows that you are the right person to work with, but they need help confirming that for a number of reasons. It could be the risk of doing the deal versus the potential upside might not be big enough. There's loads of ways to go at it, perhaps. But what, from a practical perspective, can we do in a conversation to get someone who, you can sense, or you've asked them maybe if they know that it's the right thing to do, but you've got to get them over that kind of final hurdle?
I think that's through good questioning and, sprinkling in facts. So, we're talking about like a partway into the conversation, so I'm trying to think of how to segue into that. I can sense from our conversations, that what we're talking about would be valuable to you, and that there's a hesitation or something, that's going on. Help me understand, what is that hesitation, or what are your thoughts about making that move? And something just open like that, and giving them permission to tell you, well, you know what, my hesitation is I know all the paperwork that's going to follow, and I just don't have time to take care of it. Or I know procurement, really wants us to work with these specific providers, and you're not on that list yet. But that's going to help us dig out those real concerns or objections that then we can work together with to problem solve if they really want to work with us. But we have to, at the right time, be paying attention in the conversations to give our observation and ask those tough questions about, what am I sensing? I mean, I sense that you are finding value in what we've discussed, and yet things aren't moving forward. What's going on? I mean, we have to earn the right to do that, of course.
Let's touch on this, because this is super valuable for the audience, because I bet there's people listening now that go, that sounds fantastic, but I'm nervous of calling someone out, even when I know that, what they're thinking is open in the room. You can see it with the body language. You've got a gut feeling about it, but it takes a bit of confidence to be able to clearly call someone out if they are, one, not being full and open with you about the information that they've got that they can pass across, and two, if they're hesitating. Is there a way of doing this subtly or simply, or do we need to just jump in and grab hold of the conversation and have less fear of things like this?
Well, there are no absolutes, so it's hard to answer a global question like that because there's no absolutes, because you have had to earn the right to be in that position. And when you earn the right through the rest of your conversations, that's why conversations have a framework to them. And if we skip parts of that and then just jump to trying to get a decision or something like that, it's not going to fly. We're not going to be confident. They're not going to have trusted us enough. So being able to get to that point, it could be a 20-minute conversation that earned us that right. It could be 3 previous conversations that have earned us that right. So
if we're feeling weird about asking a difficult question, is that more than likely the fact that we've not earned the right to be in the position to ask it? And so it's difficult, it's not coming up naturally.
That's what I think. Yeah, that's my opinion, is that there is a process, stated or unstated, of earning the right to different pieces of getting good information. And that's why having a framework to your conversations helps you start that conversation productively, because you prepared. It helps you initiate to set the objective. It helps you, all of those things are necessary to get to that part.
Well, let's touch on that. We'll wrap up the show with this, and then we'll have you back on to cover the second half of the conversation. But what is the structure then from perhaps we can skip the fact that we're qualified, that we're sat in the room with them or on the phone with them and they're happy to have us there. So start from that point. How do we then go about earning the right to ask the difficult questions that the difficult questions are clearly the needle mover of all of this. So that's what we want to get to. So how do we get there?
So, it starts with being prepared. It really does. And that's not part of the conversation, but that is something every person owns. And then in that conversation, it's being clear on what are we meeting, about what's the objective of our time together, and having that established agenda up front. And again, whether that's a 10-minute meeting or an hour meeting, but you've agreed to have this time, spend this time today, want to make sure it's most productive. The plan was to do this. Is that what you're expecting? So we're getting their permission from the very beginning that this is what we're going to talk about. And if what we're going to talk about is, we're going to exchange some information to identify, what you're doing in this area, whether it's, how your supplies are in an operating room, or it's, your CPA, what are you doing for your accounting services, whatever that is, or our industrial supplies. And then that earns you the right into fact finding, because now they've said, yes, I'm giving you 20 minutes or I'm giving you 30 minutes so that we can, share information together. So now I'm in the right. And then, of course, I don't start with the challenging question. I have to start with intelligent questions. They have to be intelligent and interesting, and they have to be intentional, but they have to build to earn me the right into the challenging questions. And that's, pulling off of information that we know. So I understand in your role that, currently this, and this, how is that working for you? Or what's the history of what got you there? And that's why we have to be purposeful in our questioning, because, yeah.
Do we, and I interrupted you then, but how purposeful do we need to be? And I say this because obviously there's a sliding scale here of people who will be 100% analytical minded, which is what I am, and I will sit down, I'll perhaps write out 15 questions, and then in my beginning of my sales career, I could very easily sit there, stare at a pad of paper and say, hey, Dr. Yada Yada, I'm going to go through these questions and just not even look up and not really pay attention, which clearly is not the best way to go about it. But then on the other side of things, you've got the person who thinks, well, I know the gist of what I want to talk about, and we'll see what happens. So really practically for the audience, what kind of preparation do we need to do? Should we be walking into a conversation with a pad of paper with the summary of the questions that we're going to ask? Is that the right level for all of this?
So here's why I say yes to that, is that we have to be prepared at that level, because that gives a lot of people confidence that if the conversation has a lull or gets off, at least I can glance down and know the direction that I want to take it. So it helps me listen better because I know I can refer there. But sitting there, like you said, with your pad, and being like, okay, we talked about that now and we talked about that. Although with analytical people, I have done that. I've said, let me just verify that we, talked about all the things. And I even had one gentleman take my pad out of my hand and said, well, let me see. And I mean, he just grabbed it. But then he looked, and for that, I made a really good impression with him that I was that prepared. He's actually brought me into 2 companies since then as he's moved in his career. So, it's different, but preparation on paper helps you be more confident so that in the conversation, part of a good conversation, just like we're having, is being present. It's listening, it's being able to adjust on the fly. I keep calling it right sizing. Throughout our whole conversation, we have to right size everything we're doing based on that other person. Because we can have all the plan in the world, but once we get into that conversation, that other person is part of it. And so we have to be adjusting along the way. And so preparation gives us the ability to go back, to keep things on track, but hopefully to settle in and be able to connect and listen and ask the right follow-up questions and take our questioning down a path that maybe we didn't expect, but it's where they're driving it. And that does come with some experience and some comfort that you don't have to be the person with every single answer. When you're there to investigate, it's okay to not talk as much as you think you should.
And on that very note, I might have just asked the wrong question, and you might have just given me a lead to perhaps a better way to ask it, in that should we be asking the questions, should we be structuring or the whole conversation around what the prospect wants and how they communicate versus how is best for us to prepare?
Absolutely. I call it the what's in it for them. And yes, who is your audience? What are they going to need? What are the types of questions they're going to answer? How much personal connection do they need? What's the pace that they want to work? Are they a fast talker? And so we need to be prepared very quickly with questions and such. Or are they someone that's analytical and we need to kind of settle in and be more measured in how we ask things so that we don't put them off that we're superficial or not serious.
And you mentioned something then, and I want to wrap up this part of the show with this, Nancy, in that should we have an end goal from the beginning? In that if we're prepping all these questions, clearly we want to lead the prospect is probably the wrong way to describe it, but we want to at least achieve something in that meeting. Should we have should all these questions be predicated around having an end goal in mind from the very outset?
We need to have an objective for every single conversation we have. So yes is the short answer. Because if there's not an objective, how do we know whether we've accomplished that and moved that situation either to the next step of the sale or to get that decision? So every conversation, to me, you said earlier, how do we know it's productive for us and them? A productive conversation is at the end of it when there's a clear decision or commitment to what's going to happen next. And they know it and we know it. So nothing is stalled and it's not a waste of time.
And what's an example of that? Again, just to get real practical, because that could cover a lot of ground there.
So a commitment to action would be that, at the end of this conversation, based on what we learned, we're going to have another meeting and now we're including somebody else. Our next step is that you're agreeing to review some information so that when we get together in 2 weeks, we can expand our conversation. They're going to now look for, what have we currently done? What have our terms been in the past? What is working for us? What's the data on this or whatever it might be? But it's very clear that, okay, based on what we've done today, you know, I've learned this, you've learned this. Our next step is, and we have to have that very clearly defined, which is our objective. And then there's no chasing afterward. Is it that next meeting? When are we scheduling it? Let's get it done now before we leave today. It's wrapping up that conversation so that each party leaves knowing, okay, I know what's coming next. I know why we did that. And there was value in that. I didn't feel my time was wasted.
And super loaded question here. Whose job is it to make sure that that happens at the end of a conversation?
Absolutely the salesperson. Never leave on assumptions. Never leave on assumptions.
Nice. I like that because I've done this in the past as well. You have a great conversation. It's going, and especially if it's more, a relationship building exercise with the, with a longer term goal of doing business, which a lot of it was when I was doing medical device sales, where you take people on training, you'd go out for meals with them afterwards, you'd have all these conversations, and then you just assume that I literally have done this. You just assume that the business is just going to come in, and then it's been a week, and then you're going, should I follow up, and then it's awkward to follow up because you're not sure what you've asked them to do. And so final question on this, Nancy, how do we record all this? Is this a dump it all into the CRM? Is this we should have a notebook with us that we take around with us and write down notes and next action points and these kind of things? How is the best way to control all this information that we're going to be giving ourselves after this show?
That's where tools come into play. A good use of tools is knowing what tool you have available to in your company and what works for you. Some people really love their paper trail. Other people, I now bring an iPad and I type my notes right into Evernote so I can quickly save it into my folders and attach it into the CRM. I think that's very dependent on the tools and resources you have and what your comfort level is in being able to access that information. But just back to the whole thing about leaving on assumptions. Yesterday, I was talking with a man, and we've been in the sales process for quite some time. And he said to me, we're not going to do something until 2018. So, let's revisit in 2017. And I said, I find that things can get lost if we wait that long. What do you think our next specific time frame for me nudging you without annoying you? And he surprised me. He said the first week of December. I said, this year? And he said, yes. Now, if I would have just taken that first thing, I probably wouldn't have contacted him for another 6 months and then had to kind of start all over. But now it's a 4 weeks out. He's given me permission to nudge him and get something on the calendar. That is a way more specific ending than hey, it was nice to talk. Let's check in a year from now.
And that permission is so important here because you're not forcing anyone to do anything, in which case they resent it and then they just never answer the phone with you again. You're leaving it, I guess, open to that. But what would you do? And final thing on this, because I'm intrigued from that example, what would you have done if that chap would have said, speak to me in 2 years, and that would have been his point that he wanted nudging? Would you have accepted that, or would you have negotiated with him perhaps to get it sooner?
So it's interesting. I've had that with him. This has been a several year in progress, and so I would say to him, he's like, probably let's touch base in another year. And I've said to him, well, is there any possibility that before then something might get started and we don't want to lose sight of the work that we've done? And he just emphatically said, you know what? Go ahead and contact me once a quarter, send me an email, but just know if I don't respond or don't schedule something, it's because nothing is happening. I promise I will talk to you when the time is right. So yesterday when we spoke, the first thing he said is, I told you I would talk to you when the time is right. And I've just been promoted. And so I'm just starting to lay the foundation. And that's why I think the real timing for implementation will be 2018. But I know I have to do things between now and then. So that's my answer.
I love it. I could literally sit here all day and throw examples at you and get your kind of like instinctive responses to the question, or responsive questions to solve the problem. That might even be an opportunity for a show itself, because there's a real skill to that. The answers that you've just given us for the past few examples I've thrown at you, I think I could probably sit down and come up with them, but on the spot, that's a whole different story. And I'm guessing that just comes from experience, right?
It's, not only my own experience, but I get to observe a lot of sales situations. And so I see and I study what happens and what works. And if that didn't work, where did it fall down? And through that, then I've been able to just see a lot. of
Good
what
stuff.
works and what doesn't. And typically when sales conversations go awry, it is the salesperson not listening, not having been prepared, or not confident in asking for the next thing that they need, whether it's a piece of information or a commitment to something.
Definitely. Well, I've been in that scenario where the worst is, or the best is, and the worst way to mess it up is when you see that the prospect is they're gonna work with you, and you get excited, you skip out the rest of the sales process, and you jump straight in, and clearly you need to continue that conversation beyond that point. And with that, Nancy, I've got a couple of questions to ask everyone that comes on the show, so we'll quickly run through these. I'm conscious of time. First one: who is the world's greatest salesperson?
I don't have a specific to answer that, Will.
Don't stress.
Because I'm like, well, it depends on, what industry are we talking about, or what this or what that. So like overall, who would I name as the number one salesperson in the world? I don't know.
Fine. Look, I'm open and excited about honest answers. Most people come out with, whoever is the politician on the mind at the moment, or whoever is the celebrity on the mind at the moment. So maybe
that was what was going through my mind is I'm not going politics, I'm not going, I'm like, oh, I'm not saying that, I'm not saying that, I'm not saying that. So I call,
No, fine.
No
other people have had the same scenario, and it's interesting to me the kind of thought process that people go through with it. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the brutal honesty of it. Okay, next one.
Well, here's one thing. To me, everything is degrees. So absolutes are really, really a hard thing to answer because there's degrees of everything. And when we're talking about people, I always say the only absolute is that there's no absolutes. So.
Okay, next one. What is one book or resource other than your own, which we'll come on to in a second, that you'd recommend to the Salesman podcast audience?
Well, I think it depends on what you want to do in your sales. So if you're looking for lead gen, Kendra Lee's, what's it called? The Sales Magnet.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, her book is great. It gives such very practical how-tos. That's the kind of books I like. And then I think also there's a book right now called Give and Take, and it's fantastic at looking at your approach to business and how, as you are networking and working with other people in your whole career, look for people that are givers and be a giver yourself. I think it's a great philosophy for long-term sales success.
Definitely. We've had Kendra on the show. I think she's coming back on in the next few weeks as well. So we'll be diving into that further with her. And I've got one final question for you, Nancy, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give her to help her become better at selling?
That she should... I would tell myself to have embraced sales much earlier. I fought sales for a long time thinking it was such a negative and just fought all of it. And if I could go back and embrace a sales career starting right out of high school, I think it would have even made a much bigger difference in my whole career. So sales is a good thing because it's about getting people, what they need, or even if they don't know it sometimes, and helping them make decisions or commitments to move forward.
Definitely. Good stuff. I appreciate that. And for everyone who's listening, for everyone who wants to learn more about creating an engaging conversation, because we've only really scratched the surface of it on this episode, where can we find out more about you, and where can we find out more about how to have a better conversation?
Well, find out more about me. First, go to LinkedIn, connect with me, send me a request. Nancy Bleeke, Bleeke, Twitter @SalesProInsider. Go to our website, which will all be in the links. And what was the last part of that?
If
they want to learn about,
if someone's listening to this and they go, holy heck, this is genuinely going to move the needle for me, where can we find out more about improving our conversational skills?
On the website under sales training. And you said, how can I genuinely, that's what our training is called, is genuine sales. And how do we have a good sales framework for our conversations, but make it our own, because we are a person in that conversation with another person. So it takes everything from conversations that sell and helps you make it into habits and actions, and that's how you get results.
Amazing. We'll link to that in the show notes over at salesman.red. We'll have you back on the show, hopefully multiple times over the next year or so, because I feel like a series of 4 or 5 episodes, and we could get real deep with this idea of conversations. And as I said in the middle of the show, we've only really covered the middle of the conversation. We've not touched on when you should initiate it, the prep that you should do before it, and then how to ask questions that you did very eloquently in the moment, because that's clearly a skill that we can work on as well. So I appreciate your time, Nancy. I appreciate your insights today. And I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Glad to have been here, and I look forward to the next ones.
And there we have it. Nancy, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate your time and your insights on this topic. I want to thank you, as always, to set every episode, and I will continue to set every episode. And thank you guys, Sales Nation, for tuning in, for sharing this with your colleagues. If you enjoyed this one, click that like button. And if you loved it and you want more of our content, very simply click that subscribe button that's below this video. And with that all said, I'll speak with you again on tomorrow's episode.